Hello again and welcome to another of our coronavirus debates as we discuss the effect of the crisis on the transport sector and specifically the intelligent transport business. Now, today we have an academic feel with three guests from the research part of our industry. So I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Anil Namdeo, who is Reader in Air Quality Management at Newcastle University, Siddartha Khastgir, who is Head of Verification and Validation at WMG at the University of Warwick, and Paul Bates, who is Director of Modelling and Appraisal at the Connected Places Catapult. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. And I'll start with you, Anil. Obviously, it's a very, very critical time for you, given that it seems that the effects of coronavirus are worse where air quality is at its worst. And so I guess your research has taken on a new urgency.
Yeah, I think, in a way, although it is a very unfortunate situation that lockdown has forced us to stay away from work and away from families, and we can't do our normal activities. But this has thrown a new challenge and new opportunity for us. For example, traffic has been reduced on our roads, and we know that predominantly in urban areas, road transport contributes significantly to air pollution. So when we have taken away a lot of traffic from our roads, air quality has improved in our cities. So there were some studies published early in April and late towards the last week of April. And we found that, for example, in European cities, traffic has gone down by 50 to 60%, and air quality has improved by more than 60%. In some cities, 45%, in some cities up to 60%. Closer to home in the UK, in London, air quality has improved by more than 55 to 60%. And you can pick up another city, for example, Newcastle, where I am. In different parts of the cities, air quality has improved differently. For example, in city center, it has improved by 55%, whereas in suburban areas, it has improved by 60%. So you can clearly see the link between the activities, transport, our travel pattern, and changes in air quality.
So what effect has that had on your research? Have you had to do anything in the very short term, other than obviously collating these statistics, to try and make sense of it or make any suggestions for the future?
Yes, certainly. So we have been very fortunate in Newcastle. We have Newcastle Urban Observatory. So that is like our living lab in the city. We collect information from more than 1,000 points on traffic and air quality, noise, water level, and so on. And this lockdown gave us a very good opportunity to look at our data. So we have analyzed the data exactly a year ago, last 5 years average for traffic and air quality. And then we could compare what are the changes in, for example, in traffic, in air quality, different pollutants, nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, and so on. So we were fortunate to have access to this urban observatory data. Then although we were working from home, but luckily our researchers could analyze the data and we could do the analysis very quickly. That's why all those numbers I have thrown at you, they were produced by our researchers who could analyze the data very quickly. And this data is available for anyone to access and analyze, and that has given us good opportunities for looking at different dimensions, how travel patterns have changed, how footfall in city center versus other areas have changed, and how it has impacted on traffic and air quality.
Okay, we'll come back to you in a minute, Anil, but I want to speak to Siddartha because, Siddartha, you've been working on driverless vehicles and the sort of medium to long-term future of transport. And of course, over the last 2 months, the whole of transport has been turned on its head. So you're almost facing accusations, I guess, of being rather like the head chef on the Titanic, deciding tomorrow night's dinner as the ship begins to sink. What have you changed anything in the way that you've been researching, or has it for you been pretty much business as usual?
Thanks, Paul, for the question. It's an interesting one. I'll answer it in two ways. One way is from a research on connected autonomous vehicles or driverless cars, it's business as usual. But what this situation has given us an opportunity is to focus a lot on transferable skills and transferable research. So a lot of the work that we do at WMG is around batteries, is around autonomous vehicles, but a lot of the skills that our research staff have is very transferable to the situation that we are in right now. So like design of ventilators, design of PPE. So a lot of the manufacturing skills that we have, we are now putting that to use to serve the community and serve the situation right now. So I would say a part of our staff and our researchers are going on as business as usual, because we are very much focused in delivering the vision that we have for green and connected and autonomous transport. But at the same time, we also have to cognizance of the fact there's an urgent need to help the society in terms of ventilators, in terms of PPE. So a lot of our staff is now using their existing skills to cater to those kind of situations. And I think this is something that we should continue doing, is try and see what the skills that we have from a day job, and try and see how that can be applied in other domains.
Now, we've always been looking at the 2040 date for removing internal combustion engines from the roads and basically only selling electric vehicles or alternatively powered vehicles. Now, of course, when we look at, as I mentioned, the air quality situation and the effect of coronavirus worse when air quality is bad, then we have the issue of potentially a while of social distancing where people will want to use their own vehicle rather than travel on public transport. Suddenly we've got so many mobility issues, and the clean vehicle becomes not something we can look at 20 years into the future, but something we almost need yesterday. So the research that you and your colleagues are doing at WMG on batteries has become extremely critical.
Absolutely, Paul. And it's interesting that just a couple of days back, I was reading a news article that right now was the perfect situation where electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles would have been useful. And that does not mean that we feel sad and or dejected that we've not been able to reach our targets. I think it should be a sort of a motivation to fasten the pace of research and commercialization of these technologies. So we've been working in collaboration with industry from all sectors, from SMEs to large manufacturers, to ensure that we get these to market as soon as possible. But I think the key bit over here that we would like to focus is we need to get this technology into people's hands, but in a safe manner. So we should not be introducing technology which is not safe for people to use or could be misused. So I would rather take some time to ensure that it's the right technology, it's the safe technology, than introduce something that is half-baked.
Yeah, so let's move on to Paul Bate, because Paul, obviously you're looking at modelling and appraisal and the future of transport, and you've been looking a long way out, and then you're also responsible for obviously funding other businesses to do research and innovation as well. But it's almost like in the last 8 weeks, we've just torn everything up and have to start again. I mean, the president of AIMSUN in the United States spoke on a webinar from our friends at ITS Canada, basically saying we've had 5-year and 10-year and 20-year transport predictions, throw them away. They just don't count anymore. You've really got to start from square one again. So what's your view on where we are and what we're doing as far as understanding where transport is going to go in the future?
I think where we are, Paul, I think we need to recognise is we are almost in uncharted territory at the moment in terms of trying to understand those things. So, you know, to completely echo what the gentleman from AIMSUN said, is that, you know, looking at forecasts now, if you're basing them on what was happening, you know, in the recent past, they are almost certainly wrong. And we've got to understand this not only just from a forecasting point of view, but it's also, you know, when we're forecasting for transport, we're forecasting people's behaviours and how they respond in terms of the availability of transport modes and different types of services. And one thing which we've not been able to really do yet is understand what the impact this is going to make on people's decision-making processes. A lot of the work we've been looking at recently at the Catapult is about understanding how people will adapt to new technologies such as CAVs, for example, or, you know, new types of mobility services. And we've been doing and working with colleagues in other universities and doing research to help us understand that, how people's behavioural response will be. What we are, and particularly now as we're still in the middle of it, it's difficult to understand how people's perceptions will be. Certainly you get the perception at the moment that certainly in the UK, people are very wary about travelling, about wanting to go out, and, you know, people are quite happy. You get the feeling from the majority are happy being, you know, staying at home and staying safe, etc. But we do need to move forward on from this. I did think it was interesting what the Prime Minister did say yesterday in his speech, that, you know, avoid public transport, which is the exact opposite of every message coming out of government, certainly since I've been working in transport the last 25 years. So those sort of very short-term messages, I think, is we need to be very careful of, because although we've got, you know, as you know, Anil and others have highlighted, very low levels of traffic within our towns and cities at the moment, as we get moved back and try and unwind some of these measures, certainly some of the messaging from government is very much around, you know, look after yourself, you know, be careful about public transport, which could drive more users back to their cars, back to, you know, individual transport. It's going to reduce people wanting to ride share and things like that. So we need to be very careful and very, you know, understanding of what these potential outcomes are. Now, in terms of a forecasting perspective, all we can do now is think of scenarios and try and run those through and try and understand what a range of potential outcomes could be, and try and understand from that what some actions we might need to take could be.
Yeah, because if anyone tells you what transport is going to be like once we come out of this and head into whatever and I hate the phrase, but the new normal might be, is lying, because nobody has an idea. So is it an opportunity, actually, because we've almost started with a blank sheet of paper, that you can look at where you want to get to and run the scenarios to then work out what we need to do to get there, as opposed to the other way around, which is, this is where we're going, we're now going to use our modeling expertise to predict what's going to be the situation in 5, 10, 15 years time?
Precisely, you can do that, and we mustn't forget, although that COVID is the current major challenge facing us, until this arose, that the biggest challenge facing us was actually decarbonisation. And moving forward, there's an opportunity, I feel, for us to take into account some new steps now into this new normal that you referred to help us on that course towards that carbon neutral, carbon zero society. There are definitely things that we can do. There's some really good examples coming out from some of our European neighbours and cities, etc., where they're actually reallocating road space in their towns and cities now, so that people are encouraging more for walking and cycling. And it's measures like that which we perhaps need to think of, which will help us not only deal with the current corona issues, but actually going forwards, it gives us opportunity to make those changes, which in normal times would be very difficult to bring about.
So, Anil, as an expert in air quality, of course, this is an unexpected but great way to actually reset the environmental issue. But of course, economically, this is coming at a catastrophic cost. I read somewhere that the equivalent cost to the taxpayer every day is the equivalent of building 6 brand new hospitals and then basically bulldozing them into the sea. So the current situation isn't sustainable from an economic point of view, because we'll have nice clean air, but we'll all go back to, you know, foraging in forests and living in caves and things if it goes on for too much longer. So where can we find the happy medium, and what sort of expertise and research can you do to help us balance the economic needs with the environmental needs and almost use this as an opportunity?
Paul Bate has clearly demonstrated and highlighted that this situation, lockdown, has given us a number of opportunities to investigate different aspects. And in my opinion, the most important aspect is understanding people's behavior, what they are doing now during lockdown and what they will do after lockdowns. And as you already mentioned the term new normal, we don't know what the new normal will be. And because of the changes in the transport and the travel behavior, and also some conflicting messages coming out, whether to use public transport or not use public transport. So there are two types of messages, short-term messages versus long-term messages. And people are not clear about short-term messages. We need to understand how people are going to change their travel behavior. How many people will continue using cycling and walking or active mode of travel versus how many people are going to go back to tubes and underground trains and buses, public transport. Or if there is apprehension about using public transport, then there may be an uptick in the use of private cars. And these are the scenarios we need to model. This is where Paul Bates' expertise can be very useful in modeling not only the travel behavior, but the impact of these scenarios and travel pattern, and ultimately on carbon emissions and air quality. What it has suggested, the studies and recommendations coming out of Milan and Barcelona, is that we need to give back roads to people for walking and cycling. People are now getting used to the cycling, so probably if we can, this is the right time to keep it up. If you give them space, provide bike hire near the nodal points so that people can leave their cars or public transport points, and then they can pick up cycles so that they can go to city center and workplaces on their bikes or walk.
Now, I started off home working about 20 years ago when I had a roving role for a traffic news company in London. And it was actually quite hard at the time to convince people that when I was at home, I was actually working. So I almost had to work twice as hard to prove that I was actually doing the job and not just sitting watching daytime TV or staying in bed. Now, people are now learning home working. And so I think that's one of the things that could very much become the new normal, where people only travel for meetings where they need to be in the same place rather than just turn up and sit at their desk for 8 or 9 hours a day and then commute home again. But of course, for those in manufacturing or the service industry, that's going to be a big change. Manufacturers will still have to carry on going to work. And the service industry, I was talking earlier about the potential that dry cleaners in city centres might disappear because A, people aren't travelling into city centres, and B, people are wearing dry clean only clothes far less. So is there any sort of wider research taking place in both yours and Siddartha's institution as to what those attitudes and what the potential changing in the work balance of the world might be once we've come out of this, almost taking advantage of some of the lessons we've had to learn over the last few weeks to make that something that just makes the productivity better than it was?
Maybe I start now and then Siddartha can take over. I think this has given us a very good opportunity to, for example, reset and rethink. A lot of businesses are taking notice. A lot of work can be done remotely. So now we have realized that not all work or all businesses need people to be in their offices. So I think those businesses who take a stock of what are the activities and tasks which people can do remotely, maybe twice a day, they need to come to office, not all 5 days in a week. So if they have this rethink of activities, reallocation of activities, then that will change the travel pattern and consequently demand on public transport and private transport. And I think Siddartha will agree with me that we need to talk about alternative modes of vehicles. You know, electric vehicles you already talked about, and autonomous vehicles. Can we bring them forward rather than waiting until 2040? So probably I will pass it on to Siddartha to add to what I have said.
Thanks, Anil, for laying the foundation. I think one of the things that I would like to say is this situation has helped us to understand that it's okay to challenge the status quo. every time we try to make a change in the way of working, or we try to bring a change in our organizations, there's always resistance. But this situation has shown us when you're forced to, then we are absolutely capable of making that change. Now, the challenge that I see when we go back to the new normal is how much of what we are doing now would be taken over into the new normal. There are different schools of thought who believe that absolutely a lot of remote working is possible and would be taken over. I've heard a lot of organizations saying that they're not even reopening their offices because they want their staff to work from home, majority of them. So what would be interesting to see for me, especially from a UK context, is how many of these organizations in the UK accept the current state of work as the new normal. Because there is always an opportunity to say, oh, we'll just go back to the previous way of working. So I think that would be an interesting transition to notice. I do see a lot of organizations taking stock of what we are doing now and changing the new ways of changing to these way of working. But I also see a lot of organizations not doing that for obvious reasons. The other bit I would like to mention, as Anil was saying, we also need to take this as an opportunity to say why investment in research is so important. Because if we had our electric vehicle infrastructure ready now, if we had our autonomous vehicle infrastructure ready now, the technology ready, a lot of the issues that the general society is facing could have been overcome by driverless deliveries, and the pollution side could also have been sorted. But because the technology is not ready, we are not reaping the benefits. So I think it's another indicator to the government that we need the technology as soon as possible. So please support this area. So those are, I think, the two key learnings I would see. One as more as an observation that I would like to see how the society as a whole copes with this new way of working, and if it transitions it to a normal way. And the last bit I would like to say here is, having done a lot of remote working, and like all of us, I think you still need a level of physical interaction. There's no replacement for physical interaction. So if any organization says that there's no physical interaction going forward, I think that's a bit I would say not the right approach, because not having physical interaction can have lots of mental and other issues that people have to deal with. So I would absolutely like to say physical interaction is needed, but the level of physical interaction could be reduced significantly based on what we've been doing in the last 2 months.
Yeah, fully agree. And I think certainly it varies. I do get worried about the idea of students having their degree courses done from their childhood bedrooms rather than actually the whole experience of being at university, that is so much more than learning. I think the positive here is the more we understand about the virus, the more we realize that students sort of aged 18 to 22, 23 are very unlikely to be seriously ill, even if they do catch the virus. So perhaps these are the first places that will open up, and you'll actually be heading into places with real buzz and people around, which is rather unusual for us at the moment. But it was interesting what you said about investing in research and the government investment, because Paul, I mentioned earlier about the almost tsunami of economic woe that is just about to hit us. It therefore means that, to be honest, the only people that will have any money at the moment is the government. And of course, the government doesn't really have money because it only has what the taxpayer gives it. So that puts a lot of pressure on the government to spend its money wisely on investment, on things that are going to pay back in the long term. So how do you look at an application for funding and work out what's going to be good investment and what's just going to be something that, well, it's a nice thing to do, but where's the wider benefit at the end of it?
I think from the Catapult's point of view, you know, and we work collaboratively with government and industry, is that we're looking to see, again, within the sectors that we represent, is that where are those areas which are going to be high impact? And that impact is all about jobs and growth. Where do we think we can help UK develop capabilities which are world leading, world beating, where there's really good opportunities for UK companies to be able to develop and exploit that technologies, not just for the UK, but on a global basis. But it is challenging, we're not necessarily here to spot winners. What we are trying to do is understand those companies who've got the best potential and work with them. We do a lot of work with SMEs. We've got over, I think, 1,400 companies in our SME program at the moment who we support through various type of activities, including accelerators and working jointly through collaborative R&D programs. But again, it's really dependent on that money being there from government to be able to underpin those activities. So obviously we do engage with the likes of BEIS, and obviously there's discussions ongoing with colleagues at Treasury as well, all about this. Really, it's really just still unfolding at the moment in terms of what the long-term impact can be. But we can see from our past experiences looking at major downturns and major economic shocks, etc. We know that the pain is still to come. It's like the tsunami that's in the distance at the moment. But I think what we can look at is to understand, and going back to some of the points that Siddartha raised, is that we understand some of the key technologies. We understand also in the longer term that we've still got the bigger challenge is actually around decarbonisation. So that longer term goal is got to be about what can we do to make both transport and our industry and everything that else we do from our households to be more resilient in terms of power and carbon generation, and how we can bring those technologies to market. And also, reflecting on a previous question of it, how we change to what this new normal is going to be. Because it is likely to be different going forwards. This actually might accelerate some changes, as I said previously, that we might have taken longer to come along. So there is an opportunity here, but again, it's reliant on, to a large extent, funding from the government to underpin that work of industry, because industry is really challenged at the moment. Industry is looking at real big shocks to both its supply chain and also its customer base, and they're looking at how they can make themselves resilient and understand what their markets and how their markets might change going forward as well. So there's a lot in turmoil at the moment. There's a lot of change, there's a lot of uncertainty, but what we can be certain of is that there is opportunities here to be had as well. What we've got to try and do is try and identify and support them and cultivate them to help them be successful.
So I would like to jump in with a small note here. And I think Paul made a very important point here. Resilience is the key thing that we need to focus on from an organizational perspective, from a sector perspective, but also from a national perspective, which I think we've been caught very bad on right now.
Gentlemen, unfortunately, we're out of time, but a fascinating discussion and very heartening to see the level of intelligence that's going into our thinking in the future. They always say if you own a business and you should be the most stupid person in the boardroom. Well, I'm very pleased to say when I'm doing a webinar today, I'm very much the most stupid person on the panel. So I appreciate all your thoughts. I also appreciate Anil's ability to teleport from outside into his living room. If he could patent that, he'll become a very rich man. So thank you very much to Dr. Anil Namdeo, who is Reader in Air Quality Management at Newcastle University, Siddartha Khastgir, who is Head of Verification and Validation at WMG at the University of Warwick, and Paul Bates, Director of Modelling and Appraisal at the Connected Places Catapult. And we'll join you again next week for another webinar, this time looking at the effects of the whole coronavirus crisis on local authorities and what they need to do with transport. So join me again next week for another webinar from ITS UK.